Sir, you need to move. That seat isn't for you. The words cracked through the quiet first-class cabin like a glass breaking on marble. For a moment, nobody breathed. A businessman, halfway through pouring bourbon into a crystal tumbler, froze. The ice clinked once, then stopped. Across the aisle, a silver-haired woman slowly lowered the magazine she had been pretending to read. Even the low mechanical hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit seemed to grow louder, vibrating faintly through the floor beneath their polished shoes. Seat 1A, the most expensive seat on Sky Atlantic Flight 492 to New York. And in that seat sat a man who, to several people in that cabin, did not look like he belonged there. Marcus Carter did not move. He sat back in the wide leather seat with the calm stillness of someone who had spent his life learning the value of silence. 41 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, skin the deep brown of polished walnut. His clothes were simple enough to be invisible in the wrong eyes. A charcoal cashmere hoodie, dark denim. White sneakers so clean they caught the soft amber cabin lights. No logos, no flashy gold chains, nothing that screamed money. But money was there, if you knew how to look. The watch peeking from beneath his sleeve was a Patek Philippe Nautilus with a Tiffany dial. Subtle, rare. The kind of piece collectors whispered about. Most people in the cabin had no idea what it was, and Marcus preferred it that way. He slowly lifted his eyes. The flight attendant standing beside him was in her mid-40s, her blonde hair pinned into the tight professional knot that airlines favored. Her name tag read Linda Parker. Her smile was still technically there, but it had hardened, the way a customer service smile hardens when the customer in front of you becomes a problem. "Sir," she said again, softer now but no less firm, "this seat is reserved for one of our priority guests." Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the seat, not touching him. Not quite, but close enough to feel like a line drawn in the sand. Marcus watched her for a moment. His eyes were calm, too calm. He reached up and slid the noise-cancelling headphones from his ears. The cabin sound rushed back in, the soft murmur of boarding passengers beyond the curtain, the clatter of a suitcase being lifted into an overhead bin, the distant whine of a catering truck outside. Marcus closed the paperback novel resting on his lap, a worn spy thriller from the 1980s. Dog-eared pages, creased spine. He placed it gently on the tray table. Then he spoke. His voice was low, smooth, controlled. "I'm pretty sure the boarding pass in my pocket disagrees with you." Linda Parker's smile flickered. Just for a second. Then she recovered. "I understand, sir," she said carefully. "But there's been a special request." Behind her, a sharp voice cut through the air. "I told you that was my seat." Heads turned. The man standing at the entrance to the first-class cabin looked like someone had assembled him entirely from expensive mistakes. Late 20s, tall but thin in the way men are thin when they rely more on money than muscle. His electric blue suit was too tight across the shoulders. The fabric stretched when he moved. A pair of dark sunglasses rested on his face despite the dim cabin lighting. He removed them slowly, revealing bloodshot eyes and the irritated confidence of someone who had never once been told no. Brandon Whitmore, 28 years old, son of real estate magnate Charles Whitmore, a name that had appeared in the business pages often enough for Marcus to recognize it without needing an introduction. Brandon stepped forward, leather briefcase swinging lightly at his side. His gaze slid over Marcus from head to toe, not slowly, dismissively, like a man scanning the clearance rack in a department store. Then he laughed once under his breath. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what I thought." Linda Parker shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Whitmore, we're trying to resolve the situation." "There is no situation," Brandon snapped. He pointed at the seat. "That's 1A. I always sit in 1A. The word always landed heavy in the air. Always. The entitlement of it echoed in the silent cabin. Marcus leaned back slightly in his seat. He studied Brandon the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. Calm, detached. A man used to reading people the way other men read contracts. And Brandon Whitmore was not complicated. The arrogance, the impatience, the casual certainty that the world rearranged itself when he spoke. Marcus had seen men like him in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in private clubs where wealth tried to masquerade as power. And he had learned something about them. They were loud, but loud did not mean strong. Brandon stepped closer, close enough that the expensive cologne rolling off him filled the air between them. "Hey," he said, snapping his fingers once in front of Marcus's face. "Buddy." The snap echoed sharply in the quiet cabin. "Wrong seat." Marcus looked at the hand, then at Brandon, then back at the seat beneath him. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed one leg over the other. "I don't think so." The businessman with the bourbon quietly set his glass down. The woman with the magazine leaned slightly forward. Across the aisle, a younger man in a tailored navy suit subtly tilted his phone camera toward the scene. Nobody spoke. The tension had a shape now. Something dense. Something growing. Brandon's jaw tightened. "You don't think so?" he repeated. Marcus shrugged lightly. "I know so." Linda Parker exhaled quietly through her nose. She could feel it now. The problem expanding. Gate delays, complaints, corporate emails waiting to be written. "Carter," she said carefully, glancing down at the tablet in her hand. "Perhaps we could find another solution." Marcus turned his head slightly. The movement was slow enough to feel deliberate. "So could he," Marcus said. Brandon laughed again, this time louder. "Yeah," he said, shaking his head. "That's not happening." He leaned down slightly, bracing one hand on the top of the seat in front of Marcus. The gesture was casual, but the posture was aggressive. "Look," Brandon said quietly, "you don't look like you belong up here." A sharp intake of breath rippled somewhere in the cabin. Marcus did not react, not outwardly. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Anger was messy. Anger made mistakes. What moved inside Marcus Carter was colder than that. Precision. Because the man leaning over him right now had no idea who he was speaking to. No idea what seat he was standing beside. No idea that the quiet man in the hoodie wasn't just another passenger on Flight 492. He was the reason that airplane was allowed to exist in the sky at all. And in less than 10 minutes, every single person on that aircraft was going to learn that the hard way. Brandon Whitmore did not notice the silence spreading through the cabin. People like him rarely did. He leaned a little closer, resting his palm against the headrest beside Marcus Carter's shoulder, the way a man might lean over a bar to corner someone who couldn't leave. "Look," Brandon said, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. "I've got a meeting in Manhattan worth more than this entire plane. I need space. I need quiet. And I need this seat." Marcus didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look irritated. He simply studied Brandon's face the way an experienced attorney studies a witness who has already begun lying before the first question is asked. The slight twitch in the jaw, the impatience in the eyes, the insecurity hidden beneath the swagger. Marcus had seen it before. Men who mistook volume for authority. "I'm already comfortable," Marcus said calmly. "I suggest you take the seat on your ticket." Brandon blinked once. The answer had not been part of his script. He straightened up slowly, turning his head toward Linda Parker, as if Marcus had just refused to follow a simple instruction. "Did you hear him?" Brandon said loudly. "He's refusing." Linda shifted her weight. The polished professionalism in her posture began to crack around the edges. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "we're trying to find a resolution." "There is no resolution," Brandon snapped. He jabbed his finger toward Marcus again. "That seat belongs to me." Marcus leaned forward slightly and reached into the pocket of his hoodie. For a moment, Brandon smirked. He assumed Marcus was about to pull out a boarding pass and argue. Instead, Marcus produced a slim leather wallet. He opened it slowly, removed a folded boarding pass, then placed it gently on the tray table. "Seat 1A, Marcus said quietly. Linda glanced down. Her tablet confirmed it immediately. Boarding completed 2 hours earlier. Priority clearance. Full fare, first class. No upgrade. No mistake. Her stomach tightened. "Sir," she said softly to Brandon, "Mr. Carter is correctly assigned." Brandon let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah? Well, that's a problem for you then." He turned to the rest of the cabin, as if the audience had finally gathered. "I'm an Infinite Platinum member with this airline. My father's company spends almost $100,000 a month on flights with you people." A businessman 2 rows back raised an eyebrow. Brandon continued, "You want that contract to disappear?" Linda's throat went dry. Corporate accounts were oxygen for airlines. Lose one big client, and executives started asking uncomfortable questions. Her eyes flicked back to Marcus. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed, as if none of this had anything to do with him. Marcus picked up his glass of sparkling water and took a slow sip. The carbonation cracked softly against the silence. "Mr. Carter," Linda said, lowering her voice, "perhaps we could speak privately for a moment." Marcus didn't move. "We're speaking now." Linda hesitated. She glanced over her shoulder. Brandon was watching her with the same impatient expression a man might give a valet who was taking too long to bring the car around. Her voice dropped further. "There's an aisle seat available in row 4. It's very spacious. We could offer you a travel voucher." Marcus tilted his head slightly. The movement was almost curious. You're asking me to leave the seat I paid for. It would help us avoid a delay. Marcus let that sentence hang in the air. He had spent 20 years negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the pattern was always the same. Someone with less power tried to shift the rules when they thought they had leverage. But the leverage here was imaginary. He tapped the boarding pass lightly with one finger. "This seat is mine," Marcus said. Brandon sighed dramatically. "Oh my God." He turned toward Linda again. "Are we seriously doing this?" Linda's shoulders tightened. "Mr. Carter, please understand." Marcus raised one finger. Not aggressively, just enough to pause the sentence. "Before you finish that thought," he said quietly, "I'd suggest choosing your next words carefully." The tone had changed, not louder, but colder. The businessman across the aisle lowered his bourbon glass again. Something about Marcus Carter had shifted. Brandon noticed it too. He frowned slightly. "You threatening her now?" Marcus looked up at him. "No." Brandon crossed his arms. "Then what are you doing?" Marcus held his gaze, giving her a chance to correct a mistake. Brandon scoffed. "The only mistake here is letting you sit in that seat." The words hung there, ugly, sharp. A murmur rippled quietly through the cabin. Linda felt her stomach drop. She had heard the implication, and worse, she had ignored it. Marcus slowly leaned back again. His eyes never left Brandon. "Is that the airline's position?" Marcus asked. Linda froze. "Excuse me." Marcus nodded slightly toward Brandon. "That I don't belong here." Linda opened her mouth, closed it again, because there was no correct answer left. Brandon solved the problem for her. "Relax," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Nobody's saying you don't belong. We're just saying you'd be more comfortable somewhere else." Marcus let out a slow breath through his nose. Not frustration, recognition. The exact moment the line had been crossed. He unbuckled his seatbelt. The click echoed clearly in the quiet cabin. Brandon grinned. "There we go." Marcus stood, and when he did, the difference between the two men became obvious. Marcus was taller, broader, solid in a way that made Brandon instinctively step back half a pace. But Marcus didn't move toward him. He reached into his pocket again, pulled out his phone. Brandon frowned. "What are you doing?" Marcus unlocked the screen. "Solving the problem." Linda's voice sharpened suddenly. "Sir, phones must remain off until boarding is complete." Marcus glanced at her. "I'm aware." Then he tapped a black icon on the screen. A simple gold scale appeared. Brandon snorted. "What is this? Some lawyer app?" Marcus lifted the phone to his ear. The call connected almost immediately. His voice changed, not louder, but precise. "Yes," Marcus said. "This is Marcus Carter." He paused, listening. Around him, the cabin had gone completely still. "Verification code Delta 7. Carter." Another pause. Then Marcus spoke again, slowly. "I'm currently on board Asset 772 Bravo. Sky Atlantic Flight 492. Linda felt her pulse spike. Asset? Marcus continued. Yes. I'm flagging a breach of operational conduct under Clause 14B. Brandon rolled his eyes. Are you kidding me? Marcus didn't look at him. No, Marcus said calmly into the phone. This is not a drill. He listened again. Then his voice hardened. Pull the insurance authorization. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Marcus lowered the phone, ended the call. Then he looked directly at Linda Parker. You should call the cockpit, Marcus said quietly. Linda blinked. Why? Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket. Because in about 3 minutes, he said, that airplane behind you is going to stop being legally allowed to fly. Linda Parker stared at Marcus Carter as if the air around him had suddenly shifted pressure. For a second, she said nothing. The sentence he had just spoken did not make sense inside the normal world of airline operations. Passengers complained. Passengers demanded upgrades. Passengers argued over seats. But passengers did not casually announce that a plane was about to lose the legal right to fly. Brandon Whitmore laughed first. A sharp, barking sound that echoed down the quiet first-class cabin. Oh, this is fantastic, Brandon said, clapping his hands once. You hear that? The guy in the hoodie just grounded the plane. A few nervous chuckles came from the rows behind him. Not because the joke was funny, because the alternative was uncomfortable. Marcus didn't react. He simply stood beside seat 1A with his hands loosely in his hoodie pockets, as calm as if he had just ordered a cup of coffee. Linda finally found her voice. Sir, she said carefully, that kind of statement is not appropriate. Marcus looked at her. You should still call the cockpit. Linda hesitated. The confidence in his tone unsettled her. People bluff when they're loud. This man wasn't loud. Brandon rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh my God, are you actually taking him seriously? He stepped forward again, leaning closer to Marcus. You're not grounding anything, Brandon said. You're not even staying on this flight. Marcus slowly turned his head toward him. For the first time, there was a hint of something colder in his eyes. Touch me, Marcus said quietly, and this becomes a police matter. Brandon stopped. Not because of fear, because the room had shifted again. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. The woman with the magazine lowered it completely now, openly watching. Brandon forced a smile. Relax, he said. Nobody's touching you. Marcus nodded slightly. Good. Linda exhaled slowly. She looked down at her tablet again as if the device might somehow offer instructions for the moment she was standing inside. The cabin door was still open. Passengers in economy were continuing to board. If this scene escalated any further, the delay would spread through the entire aircraft. Her training told her to end it quickly. Mr. Carter, she said, forcing calm back into her voice. I need you to either take the alternate seat or step off the aircraft. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Do you? Linda swallowed. Yes. Marcus watched her carefully. Years in courtrooms had taught him something about people under pressure. They revealed themselves. The weak chose convenience. The strong chose principle. Linda Parker was choosing convenience. Then you might want to make that cockpit call, Marcus said again. Brandon threw his hands up. This is ridiculous. He turned toward the galley. Hey, he shouted. Captain, you might want to come hear this guy. Linda spun toward him. Mr. Whitmore, please. But it was already too late. A chime sounded through the cabin, not the soft ding used for beverage service. The sharper triple chime used for cockpit attention. Heads turned toward the forward door. A second later it opened. Captain David Collins stepped out. 52 years old, 4 silver stripes on his shoulders, 30,000 hours in the air. His expression carried the calm authority of a man used to solving problems before they became disasters. What's going on out here? Collins asked. Brandon pointed immediately. This guy is refusing to move, and now he's making threats about grounding the plane. Captain Collins looked at Marcus, then at Linda. Is that accurate? Linda hesitated. Not a good sign. He's making unusual claims, she said. Marcus spoke before anyone else could. I informed your crew that I've invoked Clause 14B of the leasing agreement. Captain Collins blinked. Once. Then again. The color slowly drained from his face. Brandon laughed again. Oh, this just gets better. The captain ignored him. He stepped closer to Marcus. Did you say Clause 14B? Marcus nodded. I did. Collins' eyes flicked toward the aircraft door, then toward the cockpit behind him. Sir, the captain said quietly, please tell me you didn't contact Carter Equity Operations. Marcus held his gaze. I did. Brandon snorted. What is that? Some fake law firm? Captain Collins didn't even look at him. The pilot's voice dropped lower. When? Marcus checked his watch. About 2 minutes ago. The captain inhaled sharply. Linda felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Captain? She asked. Collins rubbed a hand across his forehead. Carter Equity, he said slowly, owns the leasing rights to half this fleet. The words landed like a weight in the cabin. Brandon frowned. Okay, and? The captain looked directly at Marcus again. You're Marcus Carter. It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He simply watched the realization spread across the captain's face. Collins turned abruptly toward Linda. Did you try to move him? Linda's mouth went dry. He didn't look like. She stopped. Too late. Marcus finished the sentence for her. Like someone who belongs in seat 1A. Captain Collins closed his eyes briefly. Jesus, Brandon scoffed. You people are insane. Marcus glanced toward him. The airplane you're standing in, Marcus said calmly, is technically my company's property. Brandon blinked, then laughed. No, it's not. Marcus didn't argue. He simply looked past Brandon toward the cockpit. Right on cue, the aircraft lights flickered once, then dimmed slightly. The low hum of the air conditioning unit softened. Captain Collins looked up sharply. What the hell? He turned and ran toward the cockpit door. Linda followed halfway before stopping in the aisle. Passengers were now fully alert. Phones were raised. Someone whispered. Did he really shut down the plane? Brandon's smile faded. "Okay," he muttered, glancing around. "What's happening?" Marcus walked back to seat 1A. He picked up his paperback novel. Brandon grabbed his arm. "Hey." Marcus looked down at the hand gripping his sleeve. Slowly, deliberately. Then back at Brandon. "Let go." Brandon hesitated. Something in Marcus's voice made his fingers loosen automatically. Marcus brushed the fabric of his hoodie smooth. Inside the cockpit, raised voices erupted. Captain Collins burst back out 30 seconds later. He looked 10 years older. Linda stepped toward him. "Captain?" Collins spoke quietly, but every word carried. The flight plan just disappeared from the system. The cabin went silent. Brandon stared. "What?" Collins looked directly at Marcus Carter. "The aircraft insurance authorization has been revoked." Brandon shook his head. "That's impossible." The captain's voice hardened. "No insurance means we don't move." He turned slowly toward Brandon Whitmore. "This plane isn't going anywhere." Then he gestured toward Marcus. "Because the man you tried to throw out of seat 1A. He paused, letting the words settle. "Is the one who owns it." The words hung in the cabin like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. "Because the man you tried to throw out of seat 1A is the one who owns it." No one spoke. For several seconds, the aircraft seemed suspended in a strange, fragile silence. A man in row 3 slowly lowered his laptop. The woman across the aisle forgot the champagne glass in her hand. Even the murmur from the boarding passengers beyond the curtain seemed to fade, as if the plane itself had stopped listening to the outside world. Brandon Whitmore stared at Captain Collins, then at Marcus Carter, then back at the captain again. He laughed once. A thin sound. "That's not funny," Brandon said. Captain Collins did not smile. "This aircraft is a Boeing 777 leased from Carter Equity Partners," the captain said. "The senior managing partner of that firm is standing right there." He nodded toward Marcus. Brandon blinked again. The pieces were not fitting inside his head. That's ridiculous," Brandon said. "You're telling me this guy owns the plane?" Marcus closed his paperback calmly. "My firm owns the asset," he said. Brandon shook his head. "No airline lets some random company control a flight." Marcus looked at him almost patiently. "Most airlines don't own their fleets," Marcus said. "They lease them." The businessman across the aisle whispered something under his breath. He knew that was true. Brandon's confidence cracked slightly. "So what?" he said louder. "That doesn't mean you can just shut it down." Marcus leaned back in the seat. "The leasing agreement includes operational compliance clauses," he said. Captain Collins finished the sentence quietly. Clause 14, B. Linda Parker felt her knees weaken slightly. She remembered the exact moment Marcus had said those words, the calm tone, the warning she had ignored. Brandon scoffed. "This is insane." He pointed at Marcus. "You're grounding a whole flight because someone asked you to move seats." Marcus met his eyes. "No." The word landed hard. "I grounded the aircraft because your behavior created a hostile environment in violation of the lease agreement." The woman with the magazine slowly lowered it into her lap. Phones were now openly recording. Brandon looked around the cabin as if expecting someone to support him. Nobody did. "Hostile environment?" Brandon snapped. "All I did was ask for my seat." Marcus watched him for a long moment. "You called me an affirmative action hire." The cabin air froze. Brandon's mouth opened slightly. Marcus continued. "You implied I didn't belong in this cabin." Brandon glanced toward Linda Parker. She looked down immediately. The silence was louder than any argument. Captain Collins rubbed his temple. "Mr. Carter," the captain said carefully, "there must be a way to resolve this." Marcus stood slowly. 6'3". The movement was deliberate enough that Brandon instinctively stepped back half a pace again. Marcus adjusted the sleeve of his hoodie. "I already resolved it." Collins sighed. "You've triggered a system-wide insurance withdrawal." "Yes. That grounds the aircraft." "Yes." The captain nodded once. "Then we have a problem." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "You have a problem." Behind them, the cabin lights flickered again. The air conditioning hum dropped another level. A faint mechanical whine echoed somewhere deep in the aircraft. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. "What's happening?" someone whispered. Captain Collins looked up toward the ceiling panels. "The Ground Operations Center just cut auxiliary authorization." Linda's voice trembled. "You mean the plane is actually shut down?" The captain nodded slowly. "Without insurance clearance, the tower won't authorize pushback." The businessman across the aisle leaned back in his seat. "Unbelievable." Brandon ran a hand through his hair. "Okay. This has gone far enough." He turned toward Marcus. "Congratulations. You made your point." Marcus said nothing. Brandon forced a smile. "So now turn the plane back on." Marcus blinked once. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" Marcus slid his phone out of his pocket. He turned the screen so Brandon could see. The black and gold Carter Equity logo still glowed faintly. "Once the asset is flagged as compromised," Marcus said, "it requires a full compliance review." Brandon's voice rose. "You're kidding me." Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket. "No." Captain Collins exhaled heavily. "Mr. Carter, that process could take hours." Marcus nodded. "Possibly." A wave of murmurs spread through the cabin. "Hours? I have a connection in London. This can't be real." Brandon stared at Marcus as if the man had just set fire to the entire aircraft. "You're ruining this flight for 400 people," Brandon said. Marcus walked slowly into the aisle. Every step was measured, controlled. He stopped directly in front of Brandon. The difference between them was impossible to ignore now. Brandon looked like a boy in an expensive costume. Marcus looked like a man who had signed contracts worth more than Brandon's entire life. "I was sitting quietly reading a book," Marcus said. His voice was soft, but the entire cabin heard it. "You started this." Brandon's jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this?" Marcus shook his head. "No." He looked past Brandon toward the cabin, toward the passengers who had watched everything unfold. "I'm correcting it." Captain Collins stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, if we deplane and restart the process," Marcus interrupted gently. "That's exactly what's going to happen." Linda Parker's face went pale. You mean everyone has to get off? Marcus nodded. The aircraft cannot legally move. The captain looked toward the cockpit, toward the control panels that were now slowly dimming. Tower already denied pushback, Collins muttered. Brandon exploded. This is insane! He pointed at Marcus again. You can't just walk away after this. Marcus picked up his carry-ons bag from the overhead bin. The motion was unhurried, almost casual. I'm not walking away, Marcus said. I'm deplaning. Brandon grabbed his shoulder. Hard. You're not going anywhere. The reaction was immediate. Marcus turned. His hand closed around Brandon's wrist with quiet precision. A single twist, not violent, just exact. Brandon dropped to one knee with a sharp cry. Don't touch, Marcus said calmly. The cabin went completely silent. Marcus released him. Brandon stumbled backward against the galley wall, clutching his wrist. You assaulted me, Brandon shouted. Marcus looked at him. No, he said. You grabbed me. He turned toward the open aircraft door. The jet bridge was already being reattached. Ground staff were rushing towards the entrance. Marcus slung the bag over his shoulder. Call the police if you'd like, Marcus said. Then he looked directly at Brandon Whitmore. I think they'll be very interested in the passenger manifest. The jet bridge door opened with a metallic thud that echoed into the first-class cabin. Cold airport air rushed in, carrying the smell of fuel and wet concrete. Marcus Carter stepped forward without hurry. Behind him, the cabin had erupted into noise. Passengers were standing now. Phones were raised. Questions were flying in every direction. What do you mean the plane's grounded? Is this real? I have a connection in Boston. Captain Collins lifted both hands. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. But calm had already left the aircraft. Linda Parker stood frozen near the galley, her face pale. Her mind was racing through every moment of the last 15 minutes. The request, the voucher, the words she had almost said. He doesn't look like he belongs here. Her stomach twisted. Brandon Whitmore staggered upright against the galley wall, still clutching his wrist. His expensive blue suit looked suddenly ridiculous in the chaos. You're not leaving, he shouted. Marcus paused at the doorway. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a grey tunnel toward the terminal. He turned slowly. You're welcome to try and stop me again, Marcus said. Brandon's face flushed dark red. Security, he yelled toward the terminal. I want this man detained. 2 airport security officers were already moving down the jet bridge at a brisk pace. They had received the call from the gate desk seconds earlier. The older officer stepped forward first. Sergeant Mike Alvarez, 25 years on airport patrol. He took one look at the scene and immediately recognized the familiar shape of rich people problems. What's going on here? Alvarez asked. Brandon pointed wildly. Him. Marcus stood quietly with his bag over his shoulder. He shut down the plane, Brandon continued. He threatened the crew and assaulted me. Alvarez turned toward Marcus. Marcus reached calmly into his pocket and handed over a black business card. Marcus Carter, he said. Alvarez glanced down. Carter Equity Partners, Senior Managing Partner. The officer raised an eyebrow. Then he looked toward Captain Collins. Captain? Collins stepped forward slowly. He didn't threaten the crew. the captain said. Alvarez nodded slightly. And the assault? Collins hesitated. Then he shook his head. Mr. Whitmore grabbed him first. Brandon's mouth dropped open. That's not what happened. Linda Parker stepped forward quietly. Her voice shook. It is what happened. Brandon spun toward her. What are you doing? Linda's eyes filled with tears she didn't quite let fall. I'm telling the truth. The passengers behind them had spilled into the jet bridge now. Phones were still recording. Alvarez glanced back toward Marcus. So you didn't hack the aircraft? Marcus almost smiled. No. Then why is the plane grounded? Marcus gestured gently toward Captain Collins. The captain can explain that. Collins exhaled slowly. The aircraft insurance authorization was withdrawn. Alvarez frowned. You're telling me insurance shut down a flight? Yes. Who did that? Collins nodded toward Marcus. Alvarez looked back at the man in the hoodie. You own the plane? Marcus shook his head slightly. My firm owns the asset. Alvarez rubbed his chin. Well, that's new. Brandon stepped forward again. This is insane, he said. He can't just shut down a commercial flight because he got his feelings hurt. Marcus met his eyes. It wasn't my feelings. Then what was it? My civil rights, Marcus said calmly. The sentence landed heavy in the crowded jet bridge. Someone behind them whispered, Did he say civil rights? Brandon laughed again. You're serious? Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone. The screen buzzed immediately. Incoming call. Marcus tapped the speaker button. Carter, he said. A panicked voice exploded from the phone. Marcus, what the hell is happening? Every head turned. Marcus held the phone slightly higher so Brandon could hear clearly. Hello, Daniel. Daniel Rhodes, Chief Executive Officer of Sky Atlantic Airlines. His voice was tight. We just got an alert that Flight 492 lost insurance clearance. Yes. Tell me that's a glitch. It's not. Daniel lowered his voice. Marcus, please tell me this is a misunderstanding. Marcus glanced at Brandon Whitmore. Your staff attempted to remove me from my assigned seat to accommodate Mr. Whitmore. Silence crackled through the phone. Then Daniel spoke again. Is that true? Captain Collins nodded toward the phone. Yes. Daniel exhaled sharply. Jesus. Brandon grabbed the phone from Marcus's hand. You're talking to the CEO. Daniel's voice sharpened instantly. Who is this? Brandon Whitmore. There was a pause, a long one. Then Daniel said quietly, You're the reason my aircraft is grounded? Brandon blinked. Excuse me? You're banned, Daniel said flatly. The words dropped like a hammer. Brandon's face went white. You can't do that. I just did. Marcus calmly took the phone back. Daniel continued. Marcus, what do you want? Marcus looked around the jet bridge. The phones, the witnesses, the chaos. He spoke slowly. A public apology. Done. And Mr. Whitmore is permanently banned from your airline. Daniel didn't hesitate. Also done. Brandon shook his head violently. You can't. Marcus lowered the phone slightly. Your ticket has just been voided. Brandon staggered back as if someone had punched him. Behind them, a loud groan rolled through the terminal. The departure board above Gate B12 flashed bright red. Flight 492. Cancelled. Passengers groaned. Cameras lifted higher. Alvarez whistled under his breath. "Well," the officer muttered, "that escalated." Marcus ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he turned toward the exit of the terminal. His driver was already pulling a black Cadillac Escalade to the curb outside. Brandon's voice cracked behind him. "This isn't over." Marcus stopped. He looked back once. "Actually," he said quietly, "it just started." The chaos at Gate B12 did not fade after Marcus Carter walked away. It multiplied. Passengers poured off the jet bridge in waves, voices rising, suitcases thumping against the polished terminal floor. Airport staff scrambled between phones and computer screens. A red cancelled notice glowed above the gate like a wound that would not stop bleeding. Every few seconds, another phone lifted into the air, recording the aftermath. Brandon Whitmore stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, the heat of humiliation crawling up his neck. "You can't ban me," he muttered, though no one had asked. The gate agent behind the counter kept typing. Her screen had already updated. Passenger status, revoked. Frequent flyer account, suspended pending review. Return ticket, void. She didn't look at Brandon when she spoke. "Sir, the system has processed the directive from corporate." Brandon leaned over the counter. "You fix it." Her fingers paused. "I can't." His voice sharpened. "You don't understand who I am." A few people nearby turned their heads. One of them whispered, "We know exactly who you are." Someone else laughed quietly. Sergeant Alvarez watched from a few feet away, with the calm patience of a man who had seen powerful people unravel before. Linda Parker stood behind the gate desk now, silent, pale, the tight knot in her hair slightly loose. She had already spoken to corporate operations. They had spoken back. Briefly. Coldly. She knew what was coming next. Across the terminal, near the sliding glass exit doors, Marcus Carter stepped outside. The afternoon light washed across the pavement. A black Cadillac Escalade idled at the curb. The driver stepped out immediately. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." Marcus handed him the bag. "How long was the drive?" 40 minutes with traffic, sir." Marcus nodded. He turned once, glancing back through the terminal glass. From outside, the scene looked quieter. Just another airport disruption. Inside, Brandon Whitmore's life was collapsing in real time. Marcus didn't smile. He simply got into the back seat. The Escalade door closed with a deep, quiet thud. Inside the terminal, Brandon's phone began vibrating in his hand. He glanced at the screen. "Dad. Charles Whitmore." He answered immediately. "Dad." The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. "Why is my assistant sending me videos of you trending on the internet?" Brandon frowned. "What?" "Check your phone." The call ended. Brandon opened the social media app automatically. The video was already everywhere. A shaky clip from row 2 of the aircraft cabin. It showed Brandon leaning over Marcus Carter. The words were clear. "You don't look like you belong up here." The camera caught Marcus standing, calm, measured. It caught the moment Marcus made the phone call. It caught Captain Collins saying the words, "The man you tried to remove owns the plane." The caption beneath the video read, "Rich investor tries to bully passenger out of first-class seat." Turns out the passenger owns the aircraft. Views were climbing by the second. Hundreds of thousands. Millions. Brandon's stomach dropped. He lifted the phone back to his ear and dialed his father. The call connected instantly. "Tell me this isn't real," Charles Whitmore said. Brandon's voice cracked. "It's being blown out of proportion." Silence. Then a low, controlled breath. "You picked a fight with Marcus Carter." Brandon swallowed. "He didn't look like anybody." Charles Whitmore's voice exploded. "He sits on the risk committee for the bank that holds our construction loans." Brandon blinked. "What?" "That man controls whether we get our credit line renewed next month." The noise of the terminal faded around Brandon. Passengers still argued with gate agents. Suitcases rolled. Announcements echoed overhead. But Brandon heard none of it. "He grounded the plane," Brandon whispered. Charles laughed bitterly. "You should be grateful that's all he did." The line went quiet again. Then Charles spoke slowly. "Go to a hotel." "Dad, do not come to the office." The words were sharp. "Do not come to the house." Brandon's chest tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you just cost us $200 million in financing." The call ended. Brandon lowered the phone slowly. For the first time that day, the arrogance drained out of his face. Sergeant Alvarez watched him carefully. "You all right there, son?" Brandon didn't answer. The gate agent printed a receipt and slid it across the counter. "This confirms your ticket cancellation." Brandon stared at the paper as if it were written in another language. "Where am I supposed to go?" The agent shrugged. "That's not really our department anymore." Linda Parker stepped forward. Her voice was quiet. "Mr. Whitmore." Brandon turned toward her. There was no anger in her face now, only exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she said. He stared at her. "For what? For not stopping this when I should have?" Brandon laughed weakly. "You think this is your fault?" Linda met his eyes. "Yes." He shook his head. "No." His voice cracked again. "This is his fault." Across the terminal, a group of passengers replayed the viral video again. One of them said quietly, "No." The Escalade merged into Manhattan traffic. Marcus Carter sat in the back seat, watching the skyline slide past the window. His phone buzzed again. Clara Jennings, his chief legal officer. He answered. "Tell me it's contained," she said. Marcus looked at the city lights flickering on across the river. "No," he said. "It's just getting started." By the time Marcus Carter reached Manhattan, the story had already outrun him. Screens were lighting up everywhere. Airport televisions, taxi dashboards, news alerts flashing across phones in coffee shops and office lobbies. The headline was simple. First Class Incident Grounds International Flight. The video followed immediately. Marcus sitting in seat 1A. Brandon Whitmore leaning over him. The words. "You don't look like you belong up here." Then the calm phone call. Then the captain's voice. He owns the plane. The Escalade rolled through mid-town traffic, headlights sliding across wet pavement. Marcus watched the reflections move across the glass as if they belonged to someone else's day. His phone buzzed again. Clara Jennings. He answered without looking away from the skyline. "Tell me the board hasn't called yet," Clara said. "They have," Marcus replied. "And?" "They're watching." Clara exhaled slowly. "That video just crossed 10 million views." Marcus said nothing. "Marcus," Clara continued, "this isn't just an airline dispute anymore. The civil rights angle is catching fire. I know. Civil rights groups are already asking if Carter Equity will pursue litigation." Marcus leaned his head back against the leather seat. The city lights flickered across his face. "I didn't start a lawsuit." "No," Clara said quietly, "but you started a conversation." The car turned onto Park Avenue. Inside the terminal of Sky Atlantic headquarters, 20 blocks away, a very different conversation was happening. Daniel Rhodes stood at the head of the conference table, with both hands planted against the polished surface. The executives around him looked like they had been dragged through a storm. "Tell me again," Daniel said slowly, "why my airline is trending worldwide." No one answered immediately. Finally, the operations director cleared his throat. "The incident happened during boarding. A passenger dispute." Daniel stared at him. "That's not what I asked." The director swallowed. "The passenger in seat 1A was Marcus Carter. I know who he is." Mr. Whitmore demanded the seat. Daniel's jaw tightened. "And our crew?" They attempted to move Carter to another row. Silence fell across the room. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. "You tried to move the man whose firm leases half our aircraft." The legal counsel spoke carefully. The flight attendant believed she was resolving a customer complaint. Daniel looked up again. "You mean she believed the man in the hoodie didn't belong there?" No one argued. The truth hung over the table like a bad smell. Daniel straightened slowly. "Where is Brandon Whitmore now? Still at the airport. And Carter? Already in Manhattan." Daniel nodded once. "Then we have exactly one chance to contain this." The room leaned forward. "We make it clear that Sky Atlantic does not tolerate discrimination." A communications officer spoke up. "The public already believes Carter is the victim." "Because he is." Daniel's voice was sharp. "And if we don't stand with him, we lose more than a headline." He looked around the room. "We lose our fleet." Across the city, Marcus Carter stepped out of the Escalade. The glass doors of Carter Equity Partners opened automatically. The lobby was quiet. Marble floors, soft lighting, the muted confidence of a firm that moved billions without raising its voice. The receptionist stood immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Marcus nodded once and walked toward the elevator. Clara Jennings was already waiting upstairs. When the elevator doors opened, she was standing beside the conference table with 3 tablets and a stack of printed reports. "You're famous," she said. Marcus removed his hoodie and hung it over the back of a chair. "I've been called worse." Clara slid one tablet toward him. The screen showed the video again. 30 million views now. A slow-motion clip of Brandon leaning over Marcus. Clara tapped another window. "This is where it gets interesting." The screen filled with comments. law professors analyzing the lease clause, civil rights attorneys discussing discrimination law, financial analysts speculating about Whitmore Industries. Marcus read silently. Clara watched him. "You understand what happens next?" Marcus nodded. "The bank?" Clara folded her arms. "Whitmore Industries has a credit renewal meeting with Chase in 4 days." Marcus looked up. "I know. You sit on the risk committee." "Yes." Clara leaned closer. "If that loan doesn't renew, their company collapses." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen. Brandon's face frozen mid-shout. "You don't belong here." Clara spoke again, softer. "Marcus, this can destroy them." Marcus finally looked up. They started the fire. Clara's eyes searched his face. "And you're going to finish it." Marcus walked to the window. Below them, Manhattan traffic moved in endless lines of red and white light. "No," he said quietly. "I'm going to correct it." Clara waited. Marcus turned back toward the table. "The problem isn't Brandon Whitmore." "Then what is it?" Marcus picked up the tablet again. "The problem is a system that believed he was right." Clara nodded slowly. "So what's the next move?" Marcus sat down. The same calm expression had returned to his face. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "We meet with Chase Bank." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's aggressive." Marcus closed the tablet. "It's necessary." Across the city, Brandon Whitmore sat alone in a dark hotel room. The television played the video again, over and over. The anchor's voice was calm. "Tonight, the incident aboard Sky Atlantic Flight 492 has sparked a national debate about power, privilege, and discrimination." Brandon muted the television. His phone vibrated again. Another message from his father. One sentence. "Do not speak to the press." Brandon stared at the screen. For the first time in his life, he realized something simple. The man he had tried to push out of a seat on an airplane had not just embarrassed him. He had changed the trajectory of everything. And tomorrow morning, that trajectory was about to collide with a bank boardroom in Manhattan. Morning light spilled across the Hudson River like polished steel. Inside the glass tower of Chase Bank headquarters, the conference room on the 32nd floor had already filled with tension long before the meeting officially began. Richard Whitmore sat at the far end of the table, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched so tight the muscles pulsed beneath his skin. At 59, he had the kind of face that once carried quiet authority, the look of a man who had built skyscrapers across 3 states. Today, that authority felt thin. Across from him sat 4 lawyers in dark suits, their folders neatly arranged, but their eyes restless. No one spoke much. The television mounted on the wall was muted, yet the headline still rolled beneath the silent anchor. Seat 1. An incident continues to shake airline industry. Richard didn't look at the screen. He looked at the empty chair at the other end of the table, reserved for Marcus Carter. The door opened precisely at 9 in the morning. Marcus entered alone. The room shifted immediately. It wasn't loud, no dramatic pause, but every eye followed him as he crossed the floor with measured steps. Today he wasn't wearing the hoodie. The navy suit fit him like it had been designed for war. Crisp lines, quiet authority, the same stillness that had unnerved an entire airplane cabin the day before. He placed a single folder on the table and sat down. No assistant, no entourage, just him. Richard Whitmore cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Mr. Whitmore." For several seconds no one spoke. Outside the window, ferries moved slowly along the river, and the city kept living its indifferent life. Richard leaned forward. "First, let me say I am deeply sorry for what happened yesterday." Marcus didn't respond. Richard continued. "My son's behavior was unacceptable. I've already removed him from his position at Whitmore Industries." Marcus glanced down at the folder. The motion was subtle but deliberate. "You removed him because of me," Marcus said quietly. Richard's hands tightened on the table. "I removed him because he embarrassed my company." Marcus looked up. "Your company embarrassed itself." The lawyers shifted slightly in their seats. Richard inhaled through his nose. "Marcus, we've known each other professionally for years. This doesn't have to destroy everything." Marcus opened the folder slowly. Inside were printed financial summaries, loan schedules, revenue projections. He slid the papers across the table. Richard looked down, his face drained of color. "You've reviewed our credit facility?" "Yes." Richard glanced at the lawyers. The lead attorney spoke carefully. "Mr. Carter, Whitmore Industries has maintained a flawless payment history with Chase Bank for over 15 years. Marcus nodded. "I'm aware. So this airline dispute should not affect the loan renewal process." Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair. "This isn't about an airline dispute." Richard's voice sharpened. "Then what is it about?" Marcus folded his hands. "It's about risk." The room went still again. Richard stared at him. "Risk?" Marcus turned one of the pages toward him. "Your company derives roughly 40% of its revenue from municipal construction contracts." Richard didn't answer. "Contracts that include strict diversity and ethics compliance clauses." Richard exhaled slowly. Marcus continued. "Yesterday, your vice president was recorded using racially charged language on a commercial aircraft. That video currently has more than 60 million views." The lawyer beside Richard shifted. Marcus's voice remained calm. "Cities are very sensitive to public relations crises, especially when discrimination is involved." Richard's eyes flicked to the television screen. Marcus finished the thought. "If those contracts disappear, Whitmore Industries loses nearly half its income." Richard leaned back in his chair. "And you think that justifies killing our loan?" Marcus shook his head. "No." He slid another document across the table. "I think it justifies protecting the bank's investment." The lawyer read quickly, his brow tightening. "Mr. Carter, this recommendation states the Risk Committee cannot approve renewal under current conditions." Richard's voice dropped. "If you block this loan, 3 skyscrapers stop construction." Marcus said nothing. 4,000 employees lose their jobs. Marcus still said nothing. Richard leaned forward again, desperation creeping into his tone. "You're destroying a company because of one incident on an airplane." Marcus looked at him calmly. "No." The word was quiet but absolute. "You did that." Richard's eyes flashed. "My son made a mistake." Marcus shook his head. Your son revealed a culture. The lawyers exchanged glances. Marcus closed the folder slowly. Then he spoke again. But I didn't come here to destroy Whitmore Industries. The room leaned forward. Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Then why are you here? Marcus pushed another document across the table. A solution. Richard grabbed it instantly. His eyes moved quickly across the page. The lawyer leaned over his shoulder. Both men froze. Richard looked up. You want $10 million for a scholarship fund? Yes. For civil rights law students? Yes. Richard flipped the page. And you want Brandon permanently barred from any executive position in my company? Marcus held his gaze. Correct. Richard laughed once, not amused. You're asking me to exile my own son. Marcus didn't blink. You're asking me to protect my investment. Silence stretched across the room again. Outside the window, a helicopter drifted past the skyline. Richard closed the folder slowly. What happens if I refuse? Marcus leaned back in his chair. The risk committee votes tomorrow morning. Richard's fingers trembled slightly. The lawyer beside him whispered, We won't survive a credit collapse. Richard looked at Marcus again. For the first time, the arrogance in his posture cracked. You've already decided the outcome. Marcus shook his head. No. Richard frowned. You're deciding it right now. The pen on the table felt heavier than steel. For a long moment, Richard Whitmore stared at it. Then he picked it up. His signature cut across the page with a slow, trembling line. The dynasty of Whitmore Industries survived, but the heir to it vanished with a single stroke of ink. Marcus closed the folder and stood. Pleasure doing business with you, Richard. Richard didn't answer. Marcus turned toward the door. Just before leaving, he paused. One more thing. Richard looked up weakly. The flight attendant from yesterday, Marcus said. She was fired this morning. Marcus nodded once. You're hiring her. Richard blinked. What? Executive assistant. Marcus opened the door. Starting salary $150,000. Richard stared at him. Marcus stepped into the hallway. She made a mistake under pressure, Marcus said calmly. Your son created the pressure. The door closed softly behind him. Inside the conference room, Richard Whitmore sat motionless, staring at the signature that had just rewritten his family's future. Across the city, the news alert appeared on millions of phones at once. Whitmore Industries announces major policy changes after viral airline incident. And somewhere far above Manhattan, a Boeing 777 cut through the clouds on its way to London. The quiet seat at the front of the cabin, waiting once again for the man who had turned one moment of arrogance into a lesson the entire industry would never forget. 6 months later, the air inside Terminal 4 at JFK carried the same familiar mix of jet fuel, coffee, and restless travel. But something subtle had changed. The airline staff moved a little differently now. Voices stayed calmer. Arguments at check encounters rarely escalated the way they used to. Among flight crews, the story had already become something close to folklore. They called it the Seat 1A incident. Some told it as a cautionary tale about arrogance. Others told it as a lesson about power. Most told it quietly, because every airline employee now knew exactly who Marcus Carter was, and they knew what happened when someone underestimated him. Marcus stepped through the sliding terminal doors, wearing the same kind of outfit that had caused so much confusion half a year earlier. A charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, clean white sneakers, nothing flashy, nothing announcing wealth, just a man walking through the terminal like any other passenger. But the reactions around him were very different now. The concierge agent spotted him before he even reached the check-in area. Her name was Eleanor Morales, a veteran airline concierge who had worked the International Lounge for nearly 20 years. She stepped forward quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Marcus nodded. "Morning." Elena held a tablet against her chest, like a formal invitation. "Captain Collins asked me to escort you personally to the lounge." Marcus smiled slightly. "How's the crew doing these days?" Elena exhaled softly. "Better than before." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The new passenger conduct policy has made things easier." Marcus understood what she meant. After the incident, Sky Atlantic had quietly rewritten several operational protocols. Crew members were no longer pressured to satisfy high-spending customers at the expense of other passengers. Corporate had learned something expensive that day. Marcus walked with Elena past the velvet rope separating the first-class line from the long queue of travelers behind it. Some people recognized him immediately. Others just sensed the unusual quiet that followed his presence. They reached the lounge. Inside, the space glowed with soft amber light and quiet piano music. Marcus took a seat near the window and ordered an espresso. For the next hour, he worked quietly on emails, investment proposals, legal drafts, a report from Clara about the scholarship program that now carried his name. $10 million funding young civil rights attorneys. The program had already received thousands of applications. Marcus read through them slowly. Stories from students across the country. Detroit, Birmingham, Oakland. People who believed law could still correct injustice. Marcus closed the laptop. Boarding for the London flight began soon after. Normally, he waited until the final call. Less time inside the cabin meant less time around crowds. But today, something pulled him toward the gate early. He couldn't quite explain it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe instinct. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a narrow grey tunnel. Marcus stepped inside. The cold February air seeped through small gaps in the fuselage connection. The aircraft sat silent outside the window. A Boeing 777, the same model that had started everything 6 months earlier. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin was empty except for a single flight attendant preparing the service trays. She looked up immediately. Recognition flashed across her face. "Mr. Carter." Marcus nodded politely. "Good morning." He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he moved toward the window beside seat 1. A. The winter sunlight was sharp. Below the aircraft, the ground crew worked quickly, loading baggage containers into the cargo hold. Fuel trucks hummed beside the wing. Catering vehicles lifted food carts into the service doors. Marcus watched quietly. Air travel looked effortless from the inside. From the outside, it was brutal labor. Cold air, heavy machinery, long hours. Invisible work that kept the luxury upstairs functioning. His eyes settled on a baggage loader parked beneath the forward cargo door. 2 men were struggling with an oversized suitcase. The older worker barked instructions. "Watch your footing!" The younger one bent down to grab the bag. He was wearing a reflective safety vest, 2 sizes too large. His gloves were missing. His hands looked raw from the cold. The suitcase slipped. It slammed onto the metal belt. The supervisor groaned. "Careful, kid." The younger worker muttered something under his breath and tried again. Marcus leaned slightly closer to the window. There was something familiar about the shape of the man's face. The jawline, the posture, the frustration. The worker paused for a moment, catching his breath. Then he looked up, directly toward the aircraft. Their eyes met. Recognition struck instantly. Brandon Whitmore froze. For half a second, the world seemed suspended between them. 6 months earlier, Brandon had stood in a tailored blue suit inside a first-class cabin. Now he stood beneath the aircraft in grease-stained work pants, hauling luggage for a ground services contractor. The arrogance was gone. The confidence had drained away. What remained was something smaller, something bruised. Brandon looked down immediately, pulling his beanie lower over his head. Marcus didn't move. Behind him, Captain Collins appeared in the cockpit doorway. "Everything all right, Mr. Carter?" Marcus turned. "Yes." Collins walked closer. "We're pushing back in 10 minutes, Marcus nodded. "Smooth flight today? Clear skies all the way to London." Marcus took his seat. Seat 1A. The same seat that had started everything. The leather felt soft beneath him. A flight attendant placed a glass of champagne on the tray table. The engines outside began to hum softly as ground crew disconnected the service vehicles. Marcus glanced once more out the window. Brandon Whitmore had already turned away. He lifted another suitcase onto the belt loader with a strained movement. The supervisor shouted something Marcus couldn't hear through the glass. The aircraft began to roll backward, slowly. Marcus picked up his book. The same worn spy novel. He opened to the dog-eared page where he had stopped reading 6 months earlier. The engines roared louder as the plane taxied toward the runway. Marcus turned the page, and finally, after half a year of chaos, arguments, and consequences, the cabin grew quiet again. The aircraft lifted off the runway with a long, steady roar. Below the wings, the grey winter ground of New York shrank into a grid of streets, rivers, and rooftops. The engines settled into their deep mechanical rhythm, the kind that felt less like noise and more like a promise that the journey had truly begun. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere returned to the quiet luxury travelers expected. Soft lighting, muted conversation, crystal glasses clinking gently against polished trays. Marcus Carter leaned back in seat 1A as the aircraft climbed through the clouds. The sunlight outside washed the cabin windows in a pale silver glow. For the first time in months, the noise around his life had faded into something distant. The lawsuit filings had settled. Whitmore Industries had restructured under new leadership. The scholarship program had already accepted its first class of law students, and the airline that once nearly pushed him out of his own seat had rewritten its entire code of passenger conduct. All because one man had refused to stand up. Marcus took a slow sip of champagne and opened his book again. The spy novel felt strangely fitting. Stories about power often hid in small moments. not in wars, not in boardrooms, but in quiet choices people made when no one expected resistance. 6 months earlier, he had simply refused to move. Down below, far beneath the aircraft, now carving a path across the Atlantic, the ground crew continued their routine on the JFK tarmac. Brandon Whitmore stood beside the belt loader, watching the departing aircraft fade into the sky. His hands were numb from the cold. The roar of the engines lingered in the air long after the plane disappeared into the clouds. The supervisor beside him slapped another luggage tag onto a suitcase. "Quit staring," the older man said. Brandon looked down quickly and lifted the bag onto the conveyor. The metal belt rattled as the suitcase disappeared into the cargo hold of another aircraft preparing for departure. 6 months earlier, Brandon had been a vice president with an office overlooking Central Park. Now he worked 12-hour shifts, moving luggage beneath airplanes he could no longer board. His father had kept his promise. The company survived. The contracts remained intact. But Brandon Whitmore's name no longer appeared anywhere inside Whitmore Industries. The price of arrogance had been permanent. Across the Atlantic, inside the warm cabin of the aircraft climbing toward cruising altitude, Marcus Carter finished another page of the book. A flight attendant approached quietly. "Anything else I can bring you, Mr. Carter?" Marcus closed the novel for a moment. "Just coffee." "Of course." The attendant smiled and returned a minute later with a steaming porcelain cup. Marcus watched the dark liquid ripple gently as the plane adjusted its course. Outside the window, the clouds stretched across the horizon like endless fields of white. The cabin was peaceful again. No arguments, no raised voices, just travelers heading toward their destinations. Captain Collins's voice came through the overhead speakers a few minutes later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. Flight time to London today will be approximately 6 hours and 40 minutes. Marcus settled deeper into the seat. For a moment he allowed himself to think back to the moment everything had started. The snap of fingers beside his seat. The demand. "You're in my seat." It had never really been about the seat. It had been about the assumption. The belief that power always looked a certain way. A certain suit, a certain background, a certain voice loud enough to intimidate everyone around it. But power did not always shout. Sometimes it sat quietly in a hoodie, reading a paperback book, waiting patiently until arrogance revealed itself. Marcus lifted the coffee cup and took a slow drink. Somewhere in the world, a young law student funded by his scholarship program was preparing for their first semester. Somewhere else, airline employees were standing a little taller because their company now protected them instead of appeasing the loudest passenger. And somewhere on the cold concrete of an airport ramp, a man who once believed he owned the world was learning what it meant to earn a place in it. Justice rarely arrived with fireworks. Most of the time it arrived quietly. A signature on a contract, a clause in a lease agreement. A calm phone call made it exactly the right moment. Marcus opened his book again and continued reading where he had left off. The engines hummed steadily as the aircraft crossed the ocean. High above the clouds, far from the noise of the world below, the cabin finally returned to the kind of silence Marcus had wanted from the beginning. The silence of a story, finished exactly the way it should have been. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. And in the comments, write 3 simple words. Justice was served.